38 below 0, and somebody is knocking on her door. 3 heavy knocks, 11 o'clock at night. The whole street is dark. Every house locked. Every curtain pulled, except one candle burning in one window. Hers. She's 72 years old, alone. The power is out. And when she opens that door, she finds 5 Hell's Angels standing on her porch. Leather cuts, tattoos up their necks, one of them bleeding through his sleeve. 2 houses already turned them away. A curtain moved at the second one, then nothing. Her neighbors will tell her she was out of her mind. The whole town will have opinions. But May Sutton doesn't know something yet. Something about the man standing at the front of that group. Something worth $3 billion. Her hand is on the doorknob. 30 seconds, and then she opens the door. The paper was folded in thirds, neat, precise, the way May Sutton did everything. She sat at the kitchen table, the one with the wobbly left leg, the one she'd shimmed up with a rolled magazine 6 months ago and never gotten around to fix properly because fix things cost money was the one thing she's never had quite enough of, and she signed her name at the bottom of the form. Slow, deliberate, like the signature itself cost something. Because it did. Third request for payment extension. Medical bill, $2,200 from a fall on the front steps last October. She'd slipped on ice scene, gone down hard on her hip, laid there for 40 minutes before she could get herself upright enough to crawl back to the door. She hadn't told anyone about the 40 minutes. She hadn't told anyone about a lot of things. May set the pen down, folded the form back into thirds, slid it into the envelope already addressed, already stamped, sitting on the corner of the table since Tuesday. Then she looked up. Leland's photograph watched her from the mantel. Same as always. That same half-smile, like he knew something she didn't. Like he was waiting for her to figure it out on her own, which was how he'd always operated. Patient, quiet, letting her arrive at things herself. "Don't look at me like that," she said. Her voice was steady, the way it always was. "We're fine." She wasn't fine, but fine was a decision. Fine was something you chose every morning when you put your feet on the cold floor and the cold came straight through your wool socks because the furnace had been proofing since November, and the kerosene heater in the living room was doing its patient, inadequate best. Fine was the word you used so that nobody worried. Nobody hovered. Nobody showed up at your door with that particular expression. The ones that mixed sympathy with helplessness and somehow made you feel worse than before they'd arrived. May Sutton did not want anyone feeling sorry for her. She was 72 years old. She had survived the closing of the Brackett Falls steel plant, which took Leland's job in 1993 and took something out of the town that never fully came back. She had survived Leland's injury, a factory accident 2 years before the plant closed, the kind that didn't kill you right away but extract payment over years, and the disability check barely covered his medication, and the long, slow process of watching a man who built things with his hands become a man who couldn't hold a cup without shaking. She had survived his death 11 years ago. Complications, the doctor said, which was the word they used when they meant everything went wrong at once and there was no single thing left to point to. She had held his hand in that hospital room, the room with the window that looked out on a parking garage, and she had promised him she'd be okay. She was keeping that promise, mostly. Brackett Falls, Ohio, 2 hours southeast of Cleveland, the kind of town that used to mean something. Back in the 70s and 80s, this place had pulse. The Cargill-Monroe plant ran 3 shifts. Men came home with grease on their boots and groceries in both arms. Churches were full on Sundays. Kids played in the streets until the streetlights came on, back when all the streetlights worked. You could raise children here and feel the ground under your feet when you said so. Then the plant closed, and then another one. And then the supplier that fed the other one. Slowly, quietly, like air leaving a tire, Brackett Falls went flat. By the time this story takes place, the town had lost nearly half its population. Main Street was dollar stores and boarded windows and a diner that had changed hands so many times nobody bothered to learn whatever name it was going by now. The kind of town you drove through without stopping. The kind of town that had learned to expect less because expecting more was a particular kind of grief it couldn't afford. And right in the middle of it, on a quiet, dead-end street called Harlan Street. In a small 2-bedroom house that Leland bought in 1979 and paid off by 1998, which was the one financial victory they'd managed to hold on to through everything, lived May Sutton, alone, every morning, 5:15. Not because she had to be awake, just because that was who she was. The remembers what the mind decides, and May had decided decades ago that morning belonged to her. Coffee in the same percolator she'd had since 1989. The thing should have died a decade ago. It hadn't. May respected that in an appliance. She fed bishop and deacon, Two stray cats who had appeared on the back porch 4 years ago and simply stayed, the way certain things do when they recognize a place that will hold them. She had named them after church deacons because they combined the same specific qualities: dignity, appetite, and an absolute refusal to apologize for either. Then she sat at the kitchen table, read her devotional, talked to Leland's photograph on the mantel. This particular week, she had told him, "Storm's coming, baby." Radio says a big one this time. She'd said it the same way she said most things. Quiet. Matter of fact. Like weather was just another item on a list she was already managing. Now let me tell you about May's situation. Because it matters. It matters for everything that comes after. The roof had been leaking since last spring. 3 buckets in the attic. She emptied them every time it rained, carried them down the pull stairs one at a time, poured them into the bathtub, carried them back up. Her hip ached on the stairs. She didn't mention that to anyone. The furnace had broken in November. Repair estimate came back at more than she had, more than she could without asking someone, which she would not do. So she heated the house with the kerosene space heater in the living room and the oven door cracked open on the lowest setting. She wore 2 sweaters and a quilt to bed. She had taped plastic sheeting over the windows to keep the drafts from finding their way in through the old frames. The tape was peeling at the corner of the kitchen window. She pressed it back each morning. The medical bill sat in a drawer because looking at it made her chest tighten in a way she didn't have time for. And her Social Security check, $1,143 a month, arrived on the same date every month and was already spoken for before it landed. Divided and allocated and gone, every dollar assigned, the way you manage when there is no margin for anything unplanned. She never complained. Not next Erestor, who was her closest friend and would have listened without judgment. Not to the Kepner family down the block, who already had enough of their own. Not to anyone. It wasn't denial. And it wasn't stubbornness, or not only that. It was something May had decided about herself a long time ago, somewhere in the years between Leland's accident and his death, when she'd had to figure out who she was going to be, now that the life she'd planned wasn't the life she was living. You make do with what you have, and while you're making do, you find a way to help somebody else. That was her code, her religion, really, more than anything she'd ever heard from a pulpit, though she'd heard plenty from pulpits over 60 years of Sundays. She watched the Kepner children 3 afternoons a week so their mother could pick up a second shift at the distribution warehouse on the edge of town. She did not charge anything. She would not hear of it. She left foil-wrapped plates of food on porches when she knew someone on the street was going through something hard. She did not knock, did not wait for a thank you. Just set the plate down and walked home with her hands in her coat pockets, eyes on the sidewalk, which she watched carefully because the sidewalk on Harlan Street had been uneven for years, and she had already fallen once. Last summer, she had organized the only neighborhood cleanup Harlan Street had seen in years. She printed flyers at the library, one at a time on their print printer, and went door to door with them. 6 people showed up on the Saturday morning she had chosen, 6 out of a street that still had 22 occupied houses. She thanked every single one of them like they had given her a gift, because to her, they had. That was May. Invisible to the town council, which had not sent anyone to look at the south end streetlights in 3 years. Invisible to the system, which processed her extension requests without ever attaching a face to the account number. Forgotten by the church she had attended for 40 years, which had merged with a larger parish 25 minutes away when the congregation shrank past the point of sustainability, and which had not called to check on her since. She had a landline, a radio, a television with 3 channels. She did not have the internet, did not have a cell phone plan that included data, did not have anyone who called just to hear how she was doing, but she knew the name of every child on Harlan Street. And she meant it, completely and without performance, when she told the Kepner children one afternoon over peanut butter sandwiches. You don't have to have a lot to give a lot. Every word of that was true, which is why what happened on the night of February 14th, the coat, the door, the 5 strangers, shouldn't have surprised anyone who actually knew May Sutton, but it surprised May. The sky went dark at 3 o'clock, not slowly, not the way afternoon light usually fades. Just dark, like something closing a hand over the sun. Snow started at 4. Heavy and immediate, the kind that doesn't ease in gradually, that doesn't give you time to decide whether it's serious. It arrived all at once, and it meant business. The radio had been warning about it for 2 days. Blizzard conditions, interstate closures expected, wind chill dropping to 38 below zero overnight. 38 below. The kind of cold that stops feeling like temperature and starts feeling like pressure. like the air itself is leaning on you. May moved through the house with quiet purpose. She filled every pot and every pan she owned with water and set them on the counters in case the pipes froze in the night, which they had done once before in the bad winter of 2019, and she had learned from it. She checked the kerosene level in the heater and judged it sufficient. She carried extra blankets from the hall closet to the couch and the recliner, distributing them the way a person distributes resources when they know the night will be long. She made a pot of chicken soup in the afternoon. It would do for dinner and for lunch tomorrow if she was careful with it. She had learned to be careful, and then in the middle of folding a blanket, she stopped, set it down, walked to the hallway closet, the deep one, where the coats lived, and stood there for a moment just looking at the back of it. Then she reached in, Leland's hunting coat, brown canvas, wool-lined, the kind of coat built to last and lasting still. It smelled like him, somehow, after all these years. Cedar and cold air and something underneath those things that she had never been able to name and had stopped trying to name and now simply received every time she opened that closet as the particular gift it was. She carried it to the living room, set it across the arm of the couch, just in case somebody needs it. She didn't know where that thought came from. She said it out loud, almost a whisper, to the empty room, the empty room you didn't answer. She didn't know why she'd done it. She would understand by morning. By 7 o'clock, Brackett Falls was buried. The snow came down so thick you couldn't see the house across the street. The wind had found every gap in every window frame and it screamed through them, a high, sustained, indifferent sound that had nothing to do with any of the people inside the houses it was pushing against. Ticks, trees cracked somewhere down the block, power lines swayed in the gusts. Then the power went out, the whole east side of town, all at once. Like someone had made a decision. Harlan Street went dark and silent. May lit 2 candles, one in the kitchen window, one on the mantel next to Leland's photograph. She turned Sarah's heater up as high as it would safely go and felt the slight, insufficient warmth it threw into the room. Outside, the temperature had dropped to 22 below zero, and the wind chill was pushing it further down still, the kind of cold that hurts the lungs on the first breath, that the body recognizes as wrong. She wrapped her quilt around her shoulders and settled into the recliner. The house groaned against the wind. Old houses do this. They argue with weather, push back against it, make sounds that let you know they're working. This house had been arguing with Ohio winters since 1979, Sidon. It knew what it was doing, she thought. I should try to sleep. She thought, I won't sleep. She was right about the second one. 5 miles north of Brackett Falls, on Highway 9, 5 men were fighting to stay alive. They were Hell's Angels, a chapter out of upstate New York. 5 riders on 5 Harleys heading south on a memorial run. The man they were honoring was named Boone. He had ridden with them for 22 years before the lung cancer took him the previous spring. Fast and mean, the way that particular disease tends to operate when it finally gets serious. Boone had been many things. Unreliable in small matters, absolutely reliable in ones that counted. The kind of man who showed up when showing up was hard and asked nothing about it afterward. Every year since Boone died, they made this ride. Same route, same weekend. It had become sacred in the way that only things carried inside grief can become sacred, said. Not because any sign on a site it should be, but because it simply was. The leader of the group was a big man, 56 years old, silver beard grown out over the winter, broad shoulders that filled a leather jacket the way they were supposed to, wrap-around glasses, fogged at the edges from the cold, hands that looked like they had spent decades doing actual work, because they had. His name was Garrett Briley. Behind him rode Colt, 24, the youngest, already riding like someone who had been doing it since before he was legally supposed to. Behind Colt rode Dez, mid-40s, quieter than the others, a man who talked with his hands and kept his phone full of photographs of his daughter, and 2 others behind him completing the line. 5 men, 5 machines, miles of highway going nowhere good. The storm came in 4 hours earlier than any forecast had suggested it would. By 6:30, visibility was already down to almost nothing. The road surface had turned to black ice under a skin of new snow, the worst possible combination, because you couldn't see it and you couldn't feel it until the moment you were already committed to it. Garrett's bike went down first. The front tire found a patch and the Harley went sideways. All 800 pounds of it, moving across the frozen asphalt with a kind of horrible, frictionless ease. Garrett went with it, rolled twice. Came up on one knee, then both feet, taking inventory of himself with the practiced efficiency of a man who has gone down before and knows how to assess the damage quickly. The others stopped. 2 bikes wouldn't restart. Batteries drained in the sudden so-called engines flooded in the jump stop. They were done. And Colt, always the youngest one, had caught the road through his jacket when he dropped his bike to avoid hitting Garrett. The gash ran from his elbow nearly to his wrist. Already bleeding through the leather, his arm was beginning to go numb. They were stranded. No cell signal. Towers were down from the ice load. No traffic in either direction. No slots anywhere. 4.8 miles south. Garrett looked at his men, at the road, at Colt's arm. He looked at all of it the way he looked at every problem, steadily, without rushing the assessment. "We walk," he said. "Push what we can. Leave the rest." They buried 3 bikes in snowdrifts on the shoulder. Garrett noted the mile marker, precisus, automatax, the same way he'd note a number in a quarterly report. Then they started south. 5 men in leather jackets and motorcycle boots bent into a wind that did not care about any of them. Now let me be direct about something. Hypothermia doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with sirens or clear warning signs. It starts at the edges, the fingers, the toes, the tips of ears, and works inward, quietly, almost politely at first. And then it is not polite at all. In those conditions, with wet leather and wet boots and an open wound, you have maybe 30 minutes of fully functional decision-making before the body starts making decisions on its own. And the decisions the body makes under hypothermia are not good ones. They feel reasonable. They feel like relief. They are how people die in the snow, not dramatically, actually. Just sit and zoom for a moment. Just rest. Garrett knew this. He had grown up in upstate New York in conditions that taught you this. He said it once at the front of the line, and he said it was not loud because the wind made loud pointless. But that carried nobody sits down. Nobody stops. You stop, you die. He walked at the front. He turned around every 100 steps and counted. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. He did this every 100 steps for the entire 4.8 miles. He did not stop counting. It took them nearly 2 hours to reach the edge of Harlan Street. When they got there, every house was dark. Either Brackett Falls had been losing families for 30 years, and the evidence was in every darkened window, or occupied by people who had made the very sensible decision to lock their doors and not answer them on a night like this. Garrett could not blame them for that. He would have done the same thing. Before this night, he would have done exactly the same thing. They knocked on the first house. Nothing. Knocked on the seconds. A curtain moved, then went still. Colt was shaking so badly he could barely stay upright. Des had sat down on a porch step, just for a moment, he'd said, and Garrett had pulled him back to his feet without a word and without slowing his own stride. Nobody sits down. They were running out of time, running out of the stubborn willpower that had kept them moving through 4.8 miles of dark and wind and cold. And then Zarrett saw it, at the far end of the block, one small flickering light in a window, just one, the only one on the entire street, moving slightly the way a candle moves. He walked up the porch steps. His boots were crusted with 2 inches of ice. Every joint in his body registered the cold in its own specific way. The knee that had taken the impact of the fall, the shoulder that had absorbed the roll, the deep tissue cold that had worked through the leather hours ago and sat now in the muscle like a fist that wouldn't open. He knocked. 3 times, heavy, the screen door rattled in its frame. Inside, May heard it. She set down her coffee cup, looked at the front door, looked at Leland's photograph, looked back at the door. She picked up the flashlight from the kitchen counter. She had put it there when the power went out, the way you put things where you'll need them, and she walked to the front door and stood there, hand on the doorknob, 30 seconds, maybe a little more. Here is what moved through her mind in those 30 seconds, not in order, not cleanly. It is 11 o'clock at night. There is a blizzard outside. I am a 72-year-old woman alone in this house, and the power is out and the street is dark. And then underneath those things, quieter but more insistent, I know what it is to need someone to open a door. Last October, on these same porch steps, ice she hadn't seen down hard on the hip, ground for 40 minutes in the cold, calling out to no one, the street jerking quiet around her, watching her own breath in the air and thinking very specifically about how much it hurt and how long it might be before anyone came. No one came. She had gotten herself up. She had gotten herself inside. She had paid the emergency room bill in installments and put the rest in a drawer and not mentioned the 40 minutes to anyone. She thought about that now, those 40 minutes. She looked at Leland's photograph. Then she opened the door. 5 enormous men. Leather vests with the death's head patch she recognized. Everyone in America knew that patch, and tattoos running up their necks and beards crusted with ice crystals and snows packed into every crease and seam of their clothing. Enormous in her doorway, filling the frame completely, the wind screaming behind them. 5 white weapons on the porch of a black grandmother in the middle of the night. Every warning she had ever received, every story, every reason the world had constructed, carefully and over many years, for her to be afraid of exactly this moment. All of it standing right there. The man at the front looked at her. His voice came out just above a whisper, too tired for volume or too aware of what he was asking. Ma'am, I'm real sorry to bother you. We got caught out in the storm. One of my guys is hurt. The wind pushed past him into the house, cold and immediate. We just need to get out of the cold. May looked at his face. At the young one in the back, the one with the soaked sleeve, the pale face, the slips going the wrong color. At the man in front of her again. This man was not dangerous. This man was exhausted, cold to his center, scared in the way that men who don't allow themselves to be afraid still end up being afraid when it actually finally counts. She had worked in a school cafeteria for 26 years. She had spent those years reading the faces of children who needed things and adults who needed things and people who came through a cafeteria line at the end of their rope and needed someone to hand them something warm without making them say so. She knew the difference between dangerous and desperate. She opened the door wider. Well, she said, get in here before you freeze to death. A beat, looking past him at the others. All of you. Five men filed through her front door. One by one they came, ducking slightly under the frame the way tall men do in old houses, and they filled her small living room so completely that shoulders were touching walls and heads were close to the ceiling. Snow melted from their boots onto the linoleum and pooled around their feet. The room filled immediately with the smell of wet leather and frozen road, and underneath those things, the smell of humans who had pushed themselves past what humans are designed to sustain. May did not flinch, not once, not even a small adjustment in her expression. She looked at them the way she looked at every problem that came through a door at her, with assessment, with the calm of a woman who had decided somewhere in the middle of the worst years of her life that panic was a luxury she could not afford and had therefore stopped carrying it. Sit down wherever you can find room, she said, and somebody get that boy to my kitchen table. Colt, the young one, the hurt one, was guided to a chair by Dez, who was barely keeping his own feet under him, but managed it. Colt's face was wrong pale, not winter pale, the specific pale of blood loss and cold working on a body at the same time. The cut on his forearms was deep, still bleeding through the torn leather of the jacket sleeve, ugly in the way wounds are ugly when they need attention now. May was already moving. She went to the bathroom and came back with the first aid kit from under the sink. White metal box, red cross on the front, Leland's kit from before he died, restocked by May every year since because that was the kind of thing she did without being asked. She sat down across from Colt, took his arm in both hands, gently, with the sureness of someone who has handled things that needed care. She rolled back what was left of the sleeve. Colt hissed. Hold still, baby, May said. I've patched up worse. She cleaned the wound with peroxide. Steady hands. No apology for in the sing. No commentary. She had learned a long time ago that the person who stays calm in the room makes everyone else calmer, and that this was a thing she could choose to be regardless of how she felt inside. She tore strips from a clean bedsheet without pausing to consider it. The sheet's purpose had just changed, that was all, and she bandaged Colt's arm. Tight, layered. The way you do it when you need it to hold through a night. That'll hold till you see a real doctor, she said. Then she stood up and moved to the next problem. Food. The pot of chicken soup was still on the stove where she'd left it. 2 servings, her dinner and tomorrow's lunch. She looked at it. Looked at 5 men in her living room. Did the arithmetic in her head. She added water. Opened can of kidney beans from the pantry shelf where she kept them. Same as her mother had kept them. Same as her grandmother had. That particular inheritance of women who know what lean months look like. Poured in a cup of dry rice. Stirred it together. Turned up the flame. Crackers. Half a loaf of bread. A jar of dill pickles she'd put up herself in August. She served them first. All 5. Bowls of soup. Crackers alongside. Bread torn into pieces. She did not make a bowl for herself. Garrett noticed. He had been watching everything in the room with the systematic attention of a man who processed spaces and situations as a matter of habit, and he noticed the 5 bowls and no 6th one. Ma'am, aren't you going to eat? Had a big lunch, May said. She had eaten half a bowl of oatmeal at noon and nothing since. The cold was the next problem, and the next was warmth. She moved through the house collecting everything she had that could do the job. Quilts from both beds, the wool blanket from the hall closet, the crocheted Afghan her mother had made 40 years ago, and which was still holding together because her mother had not made things that didn't hold. She distributed them without ceremony. Here, put this around you. Take this one. Then he went to the couch, and she picked up Leland's coat. She carried it across the living room to Garrett. He was standing against the wall, biggest of the group, coldest by her assessment, no room to sit, holding himself upright through pure habit and will. She held the coat out to him. "Put this on," she said. She paused. It was my husband's. Garrett looked at her, looked at the coat. Something was across his face, not a performed emotion, not something constructed for her benefit, but something that caught him off guard and which he didn't immediately know where to put. He took the coat with both hands, put it on carefully, one arm at a time, straightening the collar. It fit him, almost perfectly, which was a thing May noticed and did not say anything about. "Thank you, ma'am," he said. Quiet, meaning it all the way down. May turned to Des. He'd gotten his boots off, and his socks. His feet were wrong, white at the toes, waxy looking, the beginning of frostbite working its way in from the exposure. She looked at his feet. Then she got down on the floor, 72 years old, both knees on cold linoleum. It cost her. It always cost her now, the getting down, the joints registering every degree of cold in the floor. But she did it without comment, without asking for help, without making it a thing anyone else had to hold. She took Dez's feet between her palms, and she rubbed, slow, firm, working the blood from the edges back toward the center, the way her own mother had done for her once, when she was 7 years old and had stayed outside too long on a January morning and come in with fingers she couldn't feel. Des looked at her. He didn't say a word. His eyes went red at the edges. He sat completely still while this woman he had never met knelt on her own cold floor and worked warmth back into his feet with her bare hands. She rubbed until the color started coming back, pink appearing at the edges of the white. Good. Then she pulled off her own wool socks, her best pair, thick-cabled, a gift from the Kepner family 2 Christmases ago, and she put them on Desia's feet. She looked up at him. "Those are my good socks," she said. "Don't you go running off with them." Des laughed. It came out of him suddenly, helplessly, the laugh of someone who didn't expect it and couldn't have stopped it, real and surprised and wide open, and then the others laughed too. One by one, the tension in the room cracking open just enough, just a crack, letting something cess in. The first laughter that room had held in hours. Garrett watched all of it. He had a quality. People who worked alongside him had noticed it and named it among themselves, calling it the Briley look, of going completely still when he was paying real attention. Not passive stillness, active stillness, the kind that files everything. He noted the 3 buckets lined up in the hallway under brown water since it's on the ceiling, the plastic sheeting on the windows, peeling at one corner, the kerosene heater in the corner doing the work a furnace should be doing. The photographs on the wall, May younger and Lillian beside her on their wedding day, both of them grinning like the world was just getting started. A group photograph from what looked like a school cafeteria, May in a hairnet surrounded by children, all of them leaning toward her, and on the floor, under the kitchen table, a magazine, old, dog-eared, folded and wedged under the left front leg to level it. He was too far away to read the cover clearly. He could see the corner of a photograph on it, a headline in large, bold type. He didn't think about it yet. He would, but not yet. By midnight, the stories had started. Carefully at first, the way stories do when the room isn't sure of itself. Des took out his phone, not the signal was still dead, but to show May a photograph. His daughter, 5 years old. Blonde curls going in several directions at once. Missing her front left tooth and grinning about it with the specific joy of a child who has just discovered that gaps are interesting. "Lily," Des said. "Just the name. Everything else was in the photograph." May looked at it the way she looked at every child. Like, this particular child was something genuinely worth seeing. "Looks like trouble," May said. Dez's whole face changed. Best kind. Colt talked about his mother. Lived alone in Pennsylvania, closer to his sister than to him, which he felt some guilt about in the abstract but managed to address practically by calling every Sunday without fail. Even the Sundays when there was nothing new to report. Even the Sundays when the call was 10 minutes of weather and television and comfortable silence. "She worries," as explanation. "She should," Meg said. "You're out here riding motorcycles in February." Colt opened his mouth, closed it. The point was valid. May listened to all of it with the full attention she gave to everything. She had a quality, people who encountered it often couldn't name it right away, of making you feel that what you said was worth saying, that your story was being received by someone who was actually present for it. It wasn't performance, it was simply how she listened, with her whole self undivided. By 1 in the morning, they were all asleep. stretched across her floor and her couch and her recliner. 5 large men wrapped in quilts and afghans and 1 wool blanket, filling her small living room completely, breathing in the overlapping rhythms of people who have exhausted themselves fully and are now simply surrendering to that. May turned off the main light, sat at the kitchen table, kept the kerosene heater running, which meant checking it, which meant staying awake. Watched the candle burning down beside Leland's photograph. Listened to the wind, which had not lessened, which was still insisting on itself against every window. She kept watch over 5 strangers like they were her own, which, for the duration of this night, they were. At 3 in the morning, she stood up, moved quietly to the kitchen so as not to wake anyone, took out the flour, last of the bag, the sugar, last of that too. A little buttermilk, cold from the refrigerator, which she warmed briefly between her palms before adding it to the bowl because cold buttermilk tightened biscuit dough and she had not been making biscuits for 50 years to start getting them wrong now. She made biscuits from scratch at 3 in the morning in the middle of a blizzard for 5 strangers sleeping on her floor. She did not question this. It did not occur to her to question it. These men would wake up hungry. People who had exerted themselves like that in the cold always woke up hungry. And she had the ingredients, and she had the times, and she had the hands. The equation was that simple. The biscuits came out golden and right. She put them on a plate, covered them with a clean kitchen towel, set them on the counter from morning. Then she sat back down at the table, looked out the dark window at the snow still coming down, still accumulating against the fence posts and the shrubs and the base of the streetlight at the corner that hadn't worked in 3 years. She thought about Leland, about the way Garrett had taken his coat in both hands. About Colt's Mudsy in Pennsylvania, awake right now, probably, calling a phone that wasn't ringing because the signal was dead, not knowing why. She thought, they will be all right, she thought. I will make sure of it. And she sat in the dark kitchen with the candle burning on the mantel and the heater working in the corner and 5 strangers sleeping in her living room, and she waited for the sun. She did not sleep, but 5 people did, in warmth, in safety, because one woman had stood at a door in the dark and made a choice. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes when the moment is exact, that is enough. That is the whole of it. That is what you were there for. Morning came in gold. The particular gold that only exists after a major storm, when the sky has been wrung out completely and gone clear, and the new snow on the ground catches the early light and throws its cup at everything, and the world looks remade, cleaner than it was, more itself. 2 feet of snow on Harlan Street. The wind had stopped somewhere in the hours before dawn. The power lines were still dark, and inside the small house, 5 men woke up one at a time, stiff, sore, blinking in the unfamiliar light coming through plastic-sheeted windows, and then they smelled it. Coffee. And something else. Something that meant someone up in the night making things for them. May was at the stove. The biscuits were warm. She'd put them briefly back in the oven after she heard the first one stir, and the strawberry preserves she'd put herself last July were on the table in the same jar she'd sealed them in, with a clean spoon set beside it. 5 massive men crammed around a kitchen table built for 2 people. Knees against each other, elbows colliding, heads close to the low ceiling, eating biscuits with homemade jam like it was the best meal of their lives. Because right then, it was. Colt ate 3. Des closed his eyes on the first bite and stayed there for a moment. One of the others, the quiet one who had barely spoken all night, just shook his head very slowly and said "man" in a voice that meant something it didn't have words for. May stood by the stove, sipped her coffee, watched them eat. This was her gift, not the food itself. The knowing deep and settled and completely certain that she had kept 5 people alive through the night, that the candle in her window had meant something, that opening the door had been the right thing. She had never doubted it, not for one moment after the decision was made. But there was still something in seeing it, in the biscuits disappearing and the coffee being poured and the men gradually returning to themselves, the coming back, the ease returning to their bodies, that she received like something given back. Garrett pushed his chair back when he'd finished, reached into the inside pocket of his vest, dry now from hanging near the heater all night, and pulled out a fold of cash. Hundreds, mostly. He set it on the table. Didn't make a ceremony of it, just placed it there, in the space between them, like a problem with a solution. "Ma'am, this is for everything you did last night. Please take it." May looked at the money. She did not touch it. She pushed it back across the table, both hands, slow and steady. The way you return something that was delivered to the wrong address. Put that away. Her voice was not angry. Not so soft either. Clear. The way a bell is clear. No ambiguity in it. No room for negotiation. I didn't help you for money. I helped you because you needed help. Pause. That's the beginning and the end of it. The room went quiet. Garrett looked at her. A long moment. His jaw tightened once, the reflex of a man who was accustomed to problems having prices and prices selling problems, and then something in his face let go of that. His eyes went wet. 1 second. He blinked it away. The practiced blink of a man who had not cried in front of another person in so long that the muscle memory of not doing it had become a kind of second nature. He nodded. Put the money back. Then he reached into his inside pocket again and brought out a small notebook, leather-bound, dark brown. Gold-edged pages, the kind of object you would see in a room on a desk beside a legal pad, not the kind of thing you expected to come out of a motorcycle jacket. Can I have your name, ma'am? May raised an eyebrow. Honey, you don't owe me a thing. Just in case I want to send a thank you. A beep, beep. She almost smiled at that. May Sutton. She gave her address, the house number, the street, but I mean it. You don't owe me anything. He wrote it down, carefully, deliberately, like he was writing something in a place where it wouldn't be lost. He closed the notebook, slid it back into his jacket. Before they left, no one gave instructions. They simply began moving. 2 of them went outside and cleared the snow from her porch steps, scraped ice from the railing. Worked without commentary, without looking for acknowledgement. Just 2 large men in leather moving quietly through the cold morning air doing something useful. Garrett found the bag of rock salt beside the house and scattered it across the front walk. Colt nearly walked past the screen door, then looked at it. The broken hinge, it had been dragging for months, catching on the frame, never quite closing right. He pulled a multi-tool from his jacket pocket, crouched down. Fixed it in 3 minutes, tested it twice, opened and closed, cleaned both times. Stood up and moved on. Didn't say a word about it, just fixed it. May watched all of this from the doorway. She pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling and breathed carefully through her nose. She was not a woman who cried easily. She was not that kind of woman. She was absolutely that kind of woman. Colt was the last one out. He stopped in the doorway and turned back, his arms still bandaged in strips of her bedsheet, his face doing something complicated, the face of a young man feeling something he didn't have the right word for yet. He took her hand in both of his. You remind me of my grandma, he said. His voice broke on the last word. Not dramatically, just broke. May patted his arm. The way she had patted the arms of children for decades when they needed something they couldn't name. You call your mama when you get home, she said. You hear me? He nodded, could not speak, walked out. May stood in the doorway. Watched them go. 5 figures in black leather moving through white snow, getting smaller, until the road curved at the end of Harlan Street and they were gone. She went back inside, closed the door, sat at the kitchen table, finished her coffee, alone, and thought, that's a good story for the kitchen table. Nothing more. She was wrong about that, but she didn't know it yet. Outside, the sun was up fully over Brackrow Falls. It hit the snow on Harlan Street, and the whole block went white and bright and still. The candle on the mantel had burned down to its base in the night. But the morning light was there now, and it was enough. On the highway between Brackett Falls and Columbus, 2 weeks after the blizzard, Garrett and Colt stopped at a diner. The kind of place that had been there since before either of them was born and intended to outlast both of them. Plastic booths in a shade of green that no longer existed anywhere else. Coffee in mugs that had survived more winters than the town council. A slice of pie on the counter under a glass dome that neither of them ordered, but both of them ended up eating because the woman behind the counter set it out in front of them without asking, and they were not going to argue with that. The rest of the group had gone ahead. It was just the 2 of them in a corner booth, the highway visible through the window, dry and clear now, the storm already a memory the landscape had moved past. Colt wrapped both hands around his mug, looked at Garrett across the table. You've done something like this before? He said. Just walked into somebody's life and decided to change it? Garrett shook his head. Didn't elaborate. Then why her? Outside, a truck went past on the highway. The window glass shivered slightly. Garrett looked at his coffee, then out the window, then back at the mug. When I was down in that snow, he said, slowly. The way you say something you've been turning over for days and are finally letting out, when I didn't know if I was getting up. The only thing I kept thinking about was Nora. Colt said nothing. Waited. Last thing she said to me. In the hospital, near the end. Garrett's hands were still on the table. She said, Garrett, you take care of your company, but do you take care of people? The diner hummed around them. Someone's order was called at the counter. A chair scraped. I thought I understood what she meant. I thought I was already doing it. 4,000 employees. It's my son, my brother. He paused. I thought taking care of people meant making sure the structure around them was sound, making sure the numbers worked out. He looked up. I don't think that's what she meant. Colt turned his coffee mug in his hands. Once, twice. I watched that woman get down on her knees on a cold floor. Garrett said to put her own socks on a stranger's feet, and she made a joke about it so nobody would feel bad about receiving it. A long silence. Nora would have understood that immediately. She always did. I was always the one who needed more time. Colt reached across the table, put his hand on Garrett's shoulder. 1 second, maybe 2, then took it back. He didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that would improve on the silence. They finished their coffee, paid the check. Left a tip that made the woman behind the counter look twice at the table after they'd gone. They drove back to Columbus in the kind of quiet that exists between people who have been through something together and don't need to keep talking about it to know that it mattered. In Columbus, on the 24th floor of a glass building that looked down on a city that had moved on from the storm without much sentiment, Garrett Briley was failing to focus. This was new. Garrett was the kind of man who had built a company on the discipline of attention, on catching the detail everyone else walked past, on staying present in rooms where most people were thinking about the next room. His team had a phrase for the moment his gaze sharpened, and you knew he'd found something. They called it the Briley look, said it among themselves with a mixture of respect and mild wariness. But today the presentations rolled past him like weather. Someone was walking through logistics projections for a new distribution hub in Indiana. Important work. He had requested this presentation himself. He sat at the head of the table and watched the slides change and kept thinking about 3 buckets lined up under water stains on a ceiling. About a woman who heated her house with a kerosene space heater because she couldn't afford to fix the furnace. About soup that had been stretched with beans and rice and still tasted like someone had made it specifically for you. He ended the meeting 15 minutes early, which he never did. His assistant noted it without comment, which was why she had lasted 11 years. He went back to his office, looked out at Columbus in the gray February afternoon. Then he opened the bottom drawer, took out a photograph. Nora, his wife, 4 years gone. Breast cancer, caught later than it should have been because Nora had a quality of minimizing her own discomfort that he had always loved and now, in retrospect, understood differently. In the photograph, she was laughing at something off camera, head thrown back, wearing the blue sweater he'd driven 40 minutes to find because she'd mentioned it once in passing 3 months before her birthday and he had written it down. He had always been good at that, at remembering the specific things she said about wanting things. He had been less good, she had told him gently and more than once, at remembering what she needed when she didn't say it. He looked at the photograph, said her name out loud, quietly, in his empty office to the photograph. It was the first time he had said it out loud in 4 months, since the last time he had visited her grave in November, before the cold got bad enough that he found reasons not to go. She would have liked May, he said. He sat with that for a moment, then he put the photograph back, closed the drawer, pressed the intercom. Pull everything we have on Bracket Falls, Ohio, he said. Economic profile, infrastructure report, and I need a street-level assessment of Harlan Street specifically. The report came back within the hour. He read it at his desk. Median household income, $18,200 per year. Poverty rate, 36% of residents. Population decline since 1990, 47%. Harlan Street, no functioning street lighting on the south end since a budget cut in 2019. Sidewalk infrastructure rated poor to critical along 4 of the 7 residential blocks. No public green space or playground within half a mile. He read the numbers the way he read all numbers, as information, as the shape of a problem. But underneath the habit of analysis, something else was working, something that didn't have a line item. He printed the report, put it in a folder, set it on the corner of his desk where he would see it when he arrived in the morning. Then he picked up his phone, called his son. Derek answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the particular efficiency of someone in the middle of something. Dad, what's up? When's the last time you did something for somebody who had no way of paying you back? A silence. What do you mean? Not a foundation donation. Not a company initiative. Not networking dressed up as generosity. Just something for someone. Another silence, longer. I'm not sure I know what you're describing. No, Garrett said. That's what I was thinking about. He hung up, looked at the folder on the corner of his desk, picked up the other line. Set up a meeting, he told his assistant. Just me, no PR, no legal. 1 folder and an address in Bracket Falls, Ohio. Life went back to normal on Harlan Street. or what passed for normal. The buckets went back up to the attic. The plastic sheeting on the kitchen window was retaped. May pressed the peeling corner down 3 times before it held. The kerosene heater kept doing its patient, insufficient work. May told the Kepner children about the bikers on the Monday after the storm over apple slices and peanut butter at her kitchen table. Their eyes went to maximum width. Were you scared? May considered this with genuine care, as though the question deserved a real answer. No, she said. They were just cold. The little Kepner child looked at her with the expression of someone receiving information that did not compute, but they were Hell's Angels. They were cold, May said again. Cold is cold. She pushed the apple slices toward them. Conversation complete. The strange things started the following week. First, a delivery. Tuesday afternoon. A truck from Brackett Falls Hardware stopping in front of her house. 2 men carrying 2 full kerosene refill canisters to her porch, setting them down, confirming her name, leaving. May had not ordered them. She called the store. The clerk was pleasant and certain. Someone had phoned in the order 4 days ago, paid by card, gave her exact name and address, left no name of their own. Must be a mistake, May said. No, ma'am, the clerk said. They were very specific about the address. May hung up, stood in the kitchen, looked at the 2 canisters on her porch through the window, thought, someone from the old church, maybe. Being generous anonymously, it happened sometimes. Except her church had closed and the new one 25 minutes away didn't know her well enough yet to know what she needed. She let it sit, the way you let things sit when they don't resolve and you have other things to attend to. The second strange thing arrived the following week. A white truck. Logo on the door, a roofing company from 2 towns over. 2-man crew. They knocked and explained they'd been contracted to do a complimentary inspection of her roof. Charge, just an assessment. May stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. Contracted by who? The foreman checked his clipboard, ran his finger down a line. Briley Transport and Infrastructure, ma'am. May frowned. Never heard of them. Yes, ma'ams. They just want us to take a look. No obligation on your part. She was suspicious. She had lived long enough to know that no obligation usually meant the obligation came later, in a form you hadn't anticipated, but the roof was leaking, had been since last spring. 3 buckets in a worry she carried like a stone in her coat pocket through every rainstorm. She let them up. They took photographs, measured things, made notes on a tablet, thanked her, and left, that evening, over the fence. Briley Transport? Vera said. She went very still the way she did when something registered as significant. Vera had been a postal worker for 31 years. She had developed excellent instincts for things that didn't add up and for things that added up to more than they appeared. That's a real company. A big one. Garrett Briley, he's been in the news. One of those people who started with nothing. Probably a scam, May said. Scams don't send roofing crews. This one might. Vera gave her a look that contained 30 years of friendship and a great deal of patience. May went inside. Something nagged at her all evening. Wouldn't settle. That feeling of a word on the tip of the tongue that won't come forward no matter how you reach for it. She washed the dishes, folded the towels, fed Bishop and Deacon. Then she stopped in the kitchen, looked at the table. At the left front leg, she walked over. Crouched down slowly, one hand on the chair back, reached under, pulled out the magazine, stood up, held it under the kitchen light. Ohio's most unconventional business leaders, a row of small photographs along the bottom edge of the cover. Men in suits, mostly. Well, one woman, names and titles in small type beneath each face. She had been using this magazine to level her kitchen table for 6 months. She had never once looked at the cover. She looked at it now, and her eyes stopped. Third photograph from the left, silver beard, broad shoulders. And those eyes, watchful, still, the eyes of someone who processed Rusma. She knew those eyes. She had looked into those eyes across her own threshold at 11 o'clock at night in a blizzard. The name beneath the photograph, Garrett Briley. Founder and CEO, Briley Transport and Infrastructure. Estimated net worth, $1 billion. May sat down on the kitchen floor. Not because she couldn't stand. Because her legs made a decision without consulting her, and the decision was that sitting was the appropriate physical response to this information. She sat on the cold linoleum. Bishop appeared from nowhere, as he always did when the situation called for feline supervision, and stepped onto her knee and regarded her with yellow eyes. May looked at the photograph, then up at Leland's photograph on the mantel, then back at the magazine. Baby, she said. Her voice came out lighter than usual, like something in it had come untethered. I have been using a billionaire's face to keep our kitchen from wobbling. She stared at the photograph. And then May Sutton, Practical, unsentimental, 72-year-old May Sutton, who had learned long ago that the world did not generally arrange itself for dramatic effect, started to laugh, really laugh. The full-body kind, the kind that comes up from somewhere below the rib cage and takes over without permission. That makes your eyes water before you're finished. Bishop dug his claws in slightly, which was his way of registering disapproval of sudden movements. She laughed until she ran out of it, and then she was quiet. She read the article. His age, 56. Started the company at 29 with one used truck and a rented warehouse. 27 years, 4,000 employees across 6 states. She thought about how he had taken Leland's coat. 2 hands, carefully. Not the way you take something's handed to you. The way you take something you understand the weight of. She thought about the gold-edged notebook coming out of a motorcycle jacket. She thought about the way he had written her name down. The tears came without announcement. Not from the laughter. From somewhere underneath it. Something that had been sitting there, patient, waiting for the laughter to clear the path. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. She was not crying because Garrett Briley was worth $3 billion. That was not the thing. She was crying because he had taken Leland's coat in both hands like it was something sacred. Like he understood, without being told, that this particular object was not just a coat. She had not expected that, from a stranger. In a long time, from anyone. She sat on the kitchen floor until the cold came through her house dress enough to motivate movement. Then she got up, put the magazine on the counter, fed herself the bowl of soup she had not made for herself the night of the blizzard and had not properly replaced since. Looked at Leland's photograph while she ate. I don't know what comes next, she told him, but something does. She heard the engine at 10 past 10. She was at the kitchen sink washing the breakfast dishes, looking out at Harlan Street, not thinking about anything in particular. The sound registered before she consciously processed it. Low, heavy, not the sound of any vehicle that belongs on this street. She looked out the window. A black Cadillac Escalade, brand new. Chrome wheels catching the thin winter light like a statement, parked directly in front of her house with the certainty of a vehicle that knew exactly where it was going. Vera was on her porch within 45 seconds, which was, if anything, slower than usual. The woman across the street pulled her curtain back an inch. 2 men in dark suits stepped out of the rear doors, stood by the vehicle, hands folded in front of them, sunglasses despite the flat gray sky. Then the front passenger door opened. A man stepped out, tall, broad shoulders filling a tailored charcoal overcoat, silver haircut clean and short, polished shoes on a salted sidewalk. He looked like someone had taken him directly from a conference room and set him down on Harlan Street without transition, which was, in a sense, exactly what had happened. He walked up her porch steps. The same steps he had climbed 3 weeks ago with 2 inches of ice on his boots, barely upright, voice barely above a whispers. This time his back was straight, his shoes were dry. He moved like a man who was accustomed to arriving places with purpose. 2 knocks, gentle, almost careful. May had already crossed the room. She was holding the magazine. She had no memory of picking it up from the counter, but there it was, as in her hand, cover facing out. She opened the door, looked at him. At the Escalade, at the 2 suits standing beside it like architectural features. At him again, at his eyes, those particular eyes. Well, I'll be, she said, slow, as the words arriving one at a time. The biker, the corner of his mouth moved. Yes, ma'am. May looked down at the magazine in her hand. Looked back up at him. Held it out with the cover facing him, his own face looking back at himself. I have been using your face to keep my kitchen table from wobbling. Garrett Briley, founder and CEO, worth $3.1 billion. Man who had sat across from senators and renegotiated contracts that moved freight across 6 states, laughed. Not a managed laugh. Not the calibrated warmth of someone practiced at public relations. A real one. That started somewhere unguarded and moved through his whole body, that he could not have stopped if he'd tried. The 2 suits by the Escalade exchanged a glance of profound mutual confusion. Vera, on her porch, narrowed her eyes and stored everything for later. May's mouth curved, the ice broke completely. They sat at the kitchen table, same 2 chairs. Same table, same spot where he'd eaten her biscuits 3 weeks ago, the table that no longer wobbled because the magazine was now on the counter. May made tea. Garrett set his folder on the table between them and did not open it yet. He looked around the room first. Taking inventory the way he had that night, the Briley look, filing everything. Then he looked at her. Mrs. Sutton, he said, I've sat in boardrooms with people who had every advantage available to a human being. Money, resources, every door already standing open. He paused. Most of them would not have opened that door. May said nothing, listening. You had every reason not to, every single one. And you didn't just open it, you gave us everything you had. His voice was steady. His eyes were not quite. I have been thinking about that night every day since. He leaned forward slightly. I want to do something. Not as payment. You were very clear about how you feel about that. May almost smiled. As an investment, he said, in you and in this street. He opened the folder. I'm going to walk you through this one piece at a time. I need you to hear all of it before you say anything. Can you do that? May folded her hands in her lap, nodded once. The house. He looked around the room. New roof, new furnace. Updated electrical. Plumbing checked and repaired where needed. Insulation in the walls, every window replaced. He held up one hand before she could speak. Back, exactly as it is. We work around it. We fix everything else, and we do not touch that porch. May went very still. Her chin moved, just slightly. She pressed her lips to click ever. He turned to the next page. 2 blocks from here. The old Brackett Falls hardware building. Empty 3 years. Briley Foundation is going to convert it into a community kitchen and meal program. Full commercial kitchen. Seating for 40. Open 5 days a week. He looked at her regularly. You're going to run A? Blinked. Me, you. Head of operations. Salaried position. 5 staff members, all hired from Harlan Street and the surrounding blocks. Foundation covers everything for the first 3 years. Rent, utilities, equipment, food supply. After that, we moved to a sustainable model built on local partnerships. May's mouth was slightly open. No words. He turned another page. Harlan Street itself. Sidewalk repair. New street lighting on the south end. The empty lot at the corner becomes a playground. He let that land. $500,000 in a block grant, managed by a community board. Local residents making local decisions. I'd like you to chair it. May's hands, folded in her lap, had begun to shake. She pressed them flat against her knees. He turned to the last page, set down his pen. This one is personal, he said. She could hear it in his voice. The shift beneath the professional register. Briley Foundation is establishing 2 annual college scholarships, $15,000 each. Awarded graduating seniors from Brackett Falls High School who demonstrate community service. He looked at her. They'll be called the Leland and May Sutton Scholarships. The room went quiet. The kerosene heater hummed in its corner. Outside, somewhere down the block, a crow landed on a fence post and then thought better of it and flew on. May did not move. The stillness that came over her was not composed. It was the stillness of a person who has been struck somewhere deep. Not the surface, not the place you brace for impact, but somewhere internal, somewhere you didn't know could be reached. The tears came quietly, not dramatic, not announced. Just there, moving down her face,
One at a time, the tears of a woman who had held everything together for 11 years.
every bill, every cold night, every extension request, every empty chair at the table, without asking, without telling, without letting anyone see the cost of it. And someone had seen her, not the version she presented. Not fine, we're fine, I had a big lunch. Her, the actual her. Garrett did not speak. He sat and gave her the space, which told her something about him that the folder and the numbers and the Escalade outside had not. After a long moment, May wiped her face with the back of her hand. The way she did everything, without ceremony. She took a breath. You're telling me, she said, almost a whisper. Kids on this street are going to have a place to play. Yes, ma'am, and somebody's going to help them go to college. Yes, ma'am, a silence. Because I made soup. Garrett leaned forward. Because you opened the door, May. She looked at Leland's photograph on the mantel. Looked at it for a long time. The way she looked at it when she needed to think something through. When she needed his particular brand of quiet, patient certainty. Then she looked back at Garrett. Can the kitchen have Leland's name, too? He didn't hesitate. You can name it whatever you want. May reached across the table. Small hand. His twice the size, weathered differently, hers from kitchens and winters, and the particular labor of keeping a life going on not enough, his from a different kind of work, but work nonetheless. They shook on it. Then we have a deal, and May Sutton smiled. Not a polite smile, not a social smile, the real one. The kind that changed the whole shape of her face, that came from somewhere so genuine it almost hurt to receive, the kind that made you understand, seeing it, what she looked like when she was simply happy. Garrett smiled back. Outside, thin February sunlight found the snow on Harlan Street, and the whole block went bright and white and, briefly, improbably new. By the next morning, the Escalade had been seen. The suits had been seen. May Sutton's front door standing open for nearly an hour had been seen. By Thursday evening, there was a meeting, unofficial. Folding chairs from Vera's basement arranged in her living room, 9 people crowded in. Coffee on the counter, the particular energy of a neighborhood that has received unexpected news and needs to process it collectively. Not everyone was pleased. Stanton had represented this block for 14 years. He stood near the door with his arms crossed, and the expression of a man who had been through enough to know that unexpected things arriving from outside rare as a fly fed anything. Outside money always comes with strings, he said. That's not cynicism. That's history. A woman named Bernice, from 3 houses down the block, May. You let them inspect your roof without talking to any of us. You sat down with this man alone. Decisions you made affect all of us, which was fair. May knew it was fair. A younger man near the window, 3 years of funding, and then what? What? They move on to the next project and we're left maintaining something we can't afford. May sat in the center of the room and let all of it arrive, every concern. Every hardened distrust that came from living in a town that had been promised things before. The waterfront development that didn't happen. The tech incubator that lasted 18 months. The tech community center that opened and then quietly closed when the grant money ran out. She did not rush past any of it. She let it all land. When the room had said what it needed to say, she stood up. 5'3", silver hair, tired in the way of someone who has been awake and working since 5:15 for most of her adult life, and carrying underneath the tiredness something that was not tired at all. I'm not asking you to trust Garrett Briley, she said. The room went quiet. I don't know him well enough to ask that, and you don't either. Not yet. She looked around at the faces, people she had lived alongside for years. People she had left food for and watched children for, and organized cleanup days with, and celebrated and grieved alongside in the way that neighbors do when they stay long enough to accumulate a life together. What I'm asking is whether you trust the street, whether you trust the people in this room to take something offered and make it genuinely ours, not his ours. Stanton, and when he walks away after 3 years. May, then we figure out what comes next. The way we always have, the way we've always had to. A silence. I've watched every person in this room survive things that should have broken them. The plant closing, the jobs leaving, the kids leaving after them, and not one of you broke. She paused. So don't tell me we can't build a kitchen and run it ourselves. The room was quiet for another moment. Then Vera stood up. She didn't say anything. She simply stood, and then someone else, and then another. Not everyone. Stanton stayed seated. Bernice stayed seated, 2 others, but the majority of the room was on its feet. And in a neighborhood that had learned to expect less, that was more than enough to move. Spring came to Brackett Falls the way it always did, slowly, then all at once. First the edges of things. Snow pulling back from the curbs, mud showing through in the yards, the gray of February softening degree by degree into something that's almost had color in it. Then one morning you walked outside and the air smelled different, wet and green and like something that had been waiting a long time to begin. May noticed it from Leland's porch. 5:15, coffee in hand, the street quiet in the way that only early morning is quiet. Not empty, just unhurried. She noticed the air and she noticed the light and she thought, here it comes. The trucks arrived on a Monday in late April. 2 trucks first, then a third, then a van with ladders strapped to the roof. Workers in hard hats and steel-toed boots pulling up to the small 2-bedroom house on Harlan Street like it was the most important address in the county. Beefers was on her porch before the second truck had finished parking. May stood in her doorway with her coffee. May Sutton, Vera called across the yard. Is this actually happening? May looked at the trucks, at the workers already unloading equipment, at the young man in the Briley transport cap consulting a clipboard on her front walk. Apparently, she said, they started with the roof. A crew of 4 up on the house by 8 in the morning. May stayed out of their way. She made her coffee, did her devotional, fed bishop and deacon, went about her morning with the quiet efficiency she brought to everything. When the young foreman knocked to let her know they'd need attic access, she pulled the stairs down herself and brought the 3 buckets down one at a time before he could offer to help. He watched her do it. Ma'am, I've got it, she said. Pleasant, absolute. He did not argue. She set the 3 buckets by the back door, looked at them for a moment. She had counted up and down those pull stairs through 2 springs and 1 summer and 1 fall and 1 long winter. She had emptied them into the bathtub more times than she had counted. She had put them back up and watched the stains spread and pressed the tape back onto the window frames and not mentioned any of it to anyone. She carried the buckets to the garage shelf. She would not need them again. The old roof came off on the 3rd day. May watched from the kitchen window while she went about her work. Dishes, the Kepner children that afternoon, a phone call to the library about her holds. She watched the old shingles come down in sections, 30 years of Ohio weather accumulated in the layering of patches and repairs, and she felt something she didn't try to name. Not grief exactly, something adjacent to relief. The new roof went on the following morning. New shingles, new flashing, new gutters running clean along all four edges of the house. She stood in the backyard and looked up at it. Then she looked at Leland's porch, the one he had built with his own hands, his lumber, his weekends, his particular stubborn pleasure in doing a thing from the foundation up, still standing, exactly as it had always been. The workers moved around it with the careful intention of people who had been told what it meant and had listened. Just as Garrett had promised, she put her hand on the porch railing, the wood worn and smooth where hands had always gone, where her hand had gone 10,000 times. Still's here, she said, to the railing, to Leland, to whatever was listening on a Tuesday morning in late April. The furnace came the following week. 2 men in the basement for most of a day. May stayed out of their way and brought them lunch, sandwiches, and the last of the vegetable soup, left at the top of the stairs on a tray. The younger one came up for it and found her in the kitchen and told her she didn't have to do that. I know, she said. He took the tray downstairs. At 4 in the afternoon, the older one came up the stairs and told her the job was done. She could test the thermostat whenever she wanted. She probably knew where it was. She knew exactly where it was. She had walked past it every day for 4 months without touching it, because touching it would remind her that it didn't respond. She walked to the hallway, stood in front of the thermostat, reached up and turned the dial. In the basement, something clicked. A low hum began, steady and ordinary, the sound of a system doing what it was designed to do without drama or fanfare. Then warm air came through the vent in the floor. May stepped over the vent and stood there, 5 minutes, eyes closed, not moving, just receiving it, warm air from the right place, arriving without effort, without calculation, without the particular cost of getting up in the night to check the kerosene level. The foreman came up the stairs, saw her, and quietly went back down. Good man. The windows went in the week after. Double-paned, the kind that sealed properly, the kind with no gap for February to push through. May peeled the plastic sheeting off each frame herself. Corner by corner, the tape leaving pale ghost marks on the wood that would fade in time. She wadded the sheeting up and put it in the trash without ceremony. The first cold night after the new windows were in, she sat in the living room and waited. No draft from the kitchen corner. No cold line of air finding that gap above the sill. No reaching for the extra blanket she'd kept draped over the arm of the crackliner since November. She sat there a while in the warmth, just not being cold. Which sounds like nothing, which was the whole world. The workers were on Harlan Street for 3 weeks total. Roof, furnace windows, electrical panels checked and updated, plumbing inspected, and 2 pipes in the basement replaced before they became a problem. The house was worked over from foundation to ridge, carefully and without haste, by people who had been given enough time and enough resources to do it right. And through all of it, scaffolding on 3 sides, lumber carried through the yard, the noises, and organized disruption of a renovation. Leland's back porch stood untouched in the middle of everything. The workers gave it the same wide berth every day without being reminded. They had been told. They had listened. They worked around it the way water works around something fixed in the stream, finding the path that doesn't require disturbing what should stay. One morning, May came out to find the older carpenter down on one knee at the edge of the porch, running his hand along the foundation boards. He looked up when he heard her. Foundation on this section just solid, he said. Whoever built it knew what he was doing. Said it right the first time. May looked at the porch. That's the boards Leland had laid one by one on Saturday morning. A summer, measuring twice, leveled carefully, doing it right because he believed that doing a thing right the first time was the only way to do it. He did, she said. The carpenter nodded, stood up, moved on to something else. The morning after the last crew left, May got up at 5:15, made in the same percolator from 1989, fed bishop and deacon, did her devotional. Then she carried her coffee out to Leland's porch and sat in the old wooden chair, the one he had made because the chair they'd bought kept wobbling, and he had said that if something wobbled you either fixed it properly or replaced it and never simply lived with it. The air was cool but not cold, spring coming through clearly now. She sat on the porch without a coat, without an extra layer, because the house behind her was warm in the way it was supposed to be warm, and the warmth reached the back of the house and reached the door and came through the walls, and she did not need to carry warmth with her like something she had to manufacture herself. She looked out at Harlan Street in the early morning quiet. We got a new roof, baby, she said. The street was still. A bird somewhere in the oak at the end of the block. The pale light of early morning on houses that were mostly still asleep. New furnace, new windows. The back porch is exactly where you left. A pause. I know you'd have opinions about the gutters. You always had opinions about gutters. She sipped her coffee. The kids down the street are going to have a place to play. Come August, if things go right. Bishop appeared at the porch door and regarded her through the glass with the expression of a cat who has decided to observe rather than participate. I think you'd have liked him, May said. Garrett, he's a particular kind of stubborn. The kind that gets things done right because getting them done any other way doesn't sit right. You'd have recognized that in him. She sat there until the street began to wake, until lights came on in windows and a car started somewhere and the Kepner children's voices carried briefly from inside their house before the school morning absorbed them. Then she went inside and started the day. The street itself changed through the summer, not all at once. The way real things change, incrementally, one improvement landing and settling before the next one arrived. New streets went up on the south end of Harlan Street in June. Nobody organized a ceremony. One evening, they simply came on at dusk. 7 of them, evenly spaced, casting clean light on sidewalk that had been dark since 2019. Vera called May on the landline the first evening they worked. Are you seeing this? May was already at the window. I'm seeing it. Looks like a real street. It is a real street. It always was. Pause. You know what I mean? May did know. There was a difference between what a thing was and what it looked like from outside. Harlan Street had always been real. Now it looked like somewhere that someone had decided mattered. That was a different kind of thing. The sidewalks were repaired in July. Sections that had been cracked and heaved by decades of freeze-thaw cycles and tree fruits, and the particular indifference of municipal maintenance budgets replaced with new concrete, even and level. May walked the full length of the street the morning after the crew finished, without watching her feet. She had watched her feet on this street since the fall, since the ice on the October steps and the 40 minutes in the hip that still ached in cold weather. She had learned to look down, to track the ground. She walked the whole block looking straight ahead. The empty lot at the corner of Harlan and 4th became a playground in August. A crew of 6 spent 4 days on it. Swing set, climbing structure, a slide that caught the afternoon sun, rubber safety surfacing underneath, the kind that gives when a child falls, that says, "We consider swamastha, thought about what happens when someone loses their grip. We wanted it to be all right when they do." The Kepner children were there before the crew's trucks had fully left the block. May heard them from her kitchen. That particular sound, children running and screaming in the specific frequency of pure, uncomplicated joy, coming through the window on a Saturday morning in late August. She set down the dish towel, went to the window. 3 children on the swings, 2 on the climbing structure. The youngest Kepner working out the mechanics of the slide with the focused determination of someone solving an important problem, getting patient help from the oldest in the mildly exasperated manner of older siblings throughout all of human history. May watched for a long time. Then she went back to the dishes. Her eyes were not dry. It was August in Ohio, humid. The kitchen took from May to September. May was part of every decision. Garrett had meant head of operations Imson's and Sol's actual authority, actual weight, actual consequences if it went wrong. She chose the paint color. Warm cream with sage green trim, because that was the color of the best kitchen she had ever worked in, the one at Brackett Falls Elementary in 1987, and some colors carry good memory in them and are worth repeating. She chose the opening week menu without consulting anyone. Not fancy, not the kind of food that required explanation. Chicken soup, cornbread, baked macaroni with a crust on top, vegetable stew with whatever came from the fall gardens on the east side of town. Pie on Fridays because you had to give people something to look forward to at the end of the week. She hired the 5 staff members herself. She conducted the interviews at her own kitchen table with coffee and conversation rather than a formal process, because coffee and conversation told her more than any form would. The young woman from 2 streets over who had been looking for work for 8 months and had a daughter in 1st grade who she was trying very hard not to let see the worry secret. Yes. The retired man from the end of the block who had been reorganizing his garage for the 3rd time in 6 months because inactivity didn't suit him and never had. Yes. 3 others, all from within walking distance of Harlan Street, all people May had known for years in the way you know people when you stay in a place long enough, not intimately, not all in all their particulars, but in the way that matters. She had left food at their doors, had seen them through things, had said good morning across the fence for years without keeping count. She's trained them herself. Starting in August in the new kitchen with the 6-burner commercial stove that had made her eyes go wide the first time she stood in front of it. The walk-in refrigerator. The steel counters that gleamed under fluorescent light. She stood in front of that stove the first morning and put both hands flat on the surface of the counter beside it and just stood there for a moment. 50 years of cooking in kitchens that were never quite right. Too small, too poorly equipped, too under-resourced. School cafeteria equipment from 1974 held together by maintenance staff who worked miracles with limited parts. Her own kitchen at home where she had made do for decades because making do was what you did. And now this, 6 burners. Industrial ventilation, enough counter space to actually work. A prep area that didn't require you to choose between tasks because there was room for more than one thing at once. She squared her shoulders, got to work. The sign went up in late August, hand-lettered, cream background, sage, green letters, simple. So the Leland and May Immunity Kitchen. May stood on the sidewalk across the street and looked at it. The building that had been empty for 3 years. Dusty windows, faded awning, weeds pushing through the side cracks at its foundation. The ghost of the hardware store it used to be, still faintly legible under years of weather, was lit from inside. Warm light through clean windows. Tables visible beyond the glass. A bulletin board by the door, because May believed in bulletin boards and had installed one on the first day of Fit Out. His name. Her name. Together above the door of something that was going to matter. She looked at it for a long time. Then she went inside and started prepping for opening day. Opening day was a Tuesday in September. May was there at 5:30 in the morning, an hour before anyone else, an hour before she'd asked anyone else to arrive. She unlocked the back door and turned out the lights on one section at a time and started the coffee and stood at the big commercial stove and began. When the local news crew arrived mid-morning with a camera and a reporter who wanted to know what it felt like to open a community kitchen named after herself and her late husband, May looked at the camera with the patient expression of a woman who has more important things to do than discuss how things feel. "It feels like Tuesday," she said. "We're just feeding people." They aired it that evening. The phone started the next morning. Donations, volunteers, a restaurant supply company in Columbus offering to contribute equipment, a church in Cleveland asking about a monthly food partnership. May took the calls at her kitchen table at home, one at a time, writing everything in a notebook with a pen she had to shake twice to get going. She did not have a smartphone. She did not need one. 212 people came through on opening day. May counted. She always counted. Single Somer citizens from the east side of town who sat down at a table and simply sat. Without a child needing something. Without the next task pressing. Without the particular exhaustion of someone who has not had a moment that was fully their own in longer than they could remember clearly. Elderly people who had been eating alone for months, who sat across from each other and talked about nothing consequential. The weather, the new lights on Harlan Street, a television program, the pie, and who were, in this particular act of sitting across from another person over food, not alone. Teenagers who came in after school because it was warm and the macaroni was good, and someone behind the counter looked at them when they walked in and asked how their day was and actually waited for the answer. May moved through all of it, steady, refilling bowls, wiping tables, introducing herself up to people she'd known for years as though the introduction had a new context now. By 7 in the evening, when the last person had gone and her staff was cleaning the kitchen with the ease of people who have already learned how to share a space, May stood at the front window, looked out at Harlan Street, new lights on, sidewalk even under them. Playground at the far end, the swings moving slightly in the evening air. She thought about the morning she had signed the third payment extension. The way she had told Leland's photograph they were fine. She thought about what fine had cost her to maintain. And then she thought about this. 212 people fed, 5 neighbors employed, a building that had been vacancies, now full of light and the smell of cornbread. She did not have a word for what this was instead of fine. She didn't need one. Spring came again, and with it, the scholarships. The assembly at Brackett Falls High was a Thursday afternoon in April. Gymnasium. Folding chairs in rows. The kind of event that runs slightly long because the moment is bigger than the agenda allowed for, and everyone in the room knows it and nobody minds. May sat in the front row in her blue dress. Scholarships, $15,000 each. The first Leland is May Sutton scholarships. The first recipient, Jasmine Kepner. May had known Jasmine since she was 4 years old. Had made her peanut butter sandwiches at that kitchen table. Back when the table still wobbled. Back when the magazine was still under the leg. On more Tuesdays and Wednesday afternoons than either of them could count. Had watched her go from a 4-year-old who mispronounced her own last name to an 18-year-old with clear eyes and clear plans. Nursings. First in her family to go to college. The second recipients, Owen Tate. Civil engineering, he had written in his application essays. There are places that need people who believe they are worth building. I want to be one of those people for a place like this. May had read that line 3 times before she could put the paper down. She stood at the podium, hands not entirely steady. She held them still through the discipline of a woman who had been holding things steady for a long time. Looked at Jasmine, looked at Owen. The gymnasium went quiet in the way spaces go quiet when something real is happening inside them. Your job, she said, is not to pay this back. A pause. Your job is to pass it on. One more beat of silence. Then the gymnasium wasn't quiet anymore. Jasmine crossed the stage and didn't shake May's hand. She put both arms around her before she touched the envelope. The way you hold someone who has been in your life so long that ceremonies doesn't apply. May held her back, fierce and brief. Jasmine pulled back just enough. Used to make me peanut butter sandwiches. I know, baby, May said. Now go make something of yourself. They came back on a Saturday morning in September. Garrett, Daz, Colt, 2 others, leather cuts. 5 Harleys in a row in front of the kitchen, chrome catching the September light. Vera was on her porch before the last engine cut. They took the big table in the back, and May brought soup without being asked. Same recipe. Not one thing changed. Colt took the first spoonful, closed his eyes for a half-second. Still better than my mom's. Don't you tell her that, May said. Never have, he said, and reached for Brochmore bread. Dad's had brought Lily, 5 years old, blonde curls going in several directions. Missing her right front tooth, newly gone, and she had strong opinions about this and was prepared to share them at length. She walked into the kitchen ahead of her father, like she owned it, looked at May. May looked at her. Something passed between them that didn't need explaining. Lily opened her arms. May crouched down, one hand on the table, taking her time, and Lily walked in without hesitation. May closed her eyes. Held that small, warm, absolutely certain child. Hello, baby girl, she said. Lily pulled back. Opened her mouth wide to display the gap with maximum theatrical effect. My tooth fell out. I can see that. I got $1. That's good business. Lily considered this seriously, nodded. Then turned to investigate the kitchen because she was 5, and kitchens were interesting, and Des followed saying her name in the patient, resigned tone of a man who has accepted that this is simply his life now. When the others went outside, engines running, Lily in Dez's arms asking detailed questions about motorcycles. Garrett stayed behind. He stood at the counter, reached into his jacket, set a flat box between them. I had it cleaned, he said, and repaired. The lining was separating at the left shoulder seam. We found someone who works with vintage canvas, he said. Whoever built it originally used good material. May opened the box. Leland's hunting coat, brown canvas, wool lining, folded with care. The left shoulder repaired so cleanly it looked like it had never given way. She lifted it out, held it, smelled it. Cedar, cold air, him, still there. After everything, still him. You gave me something that belonged to someone you loved, Garrett said. I wanted to give it back right. May kept her eyes on the coat. Leland would have liked you, she said. He was particular about doing things right. My wife was the same, a shift in his voice.
Underneath the steadiness, something opening. Her name was Nora.
He said it the way you say something you have kept in a closed room and have finally opened the door to, not dramatically. Just out into the air where it could exist the way things need to exist when they have been held too long in the dark. She always told me I forgot how to see people, not manage them, actually see them. May, say, set the coat down. Looked at him. You see people fine, she said. You just needed reminding. Garrett was quiet for a moment, the quiet of someone who has just put down something heavy and is registering for the first time the absence of its weight. He nodded once, put his jacket on, walked to the door, stopped. May. She looked at him. Thank you. Still, for the door. She sealed his gaze. That's what doors are for, she said. He walked out. The bell above the door rang once as they closed. May stood at the counter until the engines faded down Harlan Street and the sound was gone. Then she carried Leland's coat to the hook by the back door, the same hook it had always lived on, top blocks away, in the house that was warm now. She hung it there, stepped back, looked at it. It came back right, she said. February came again, Valentine's Day. 2 years from the night of the blizzard. May didn't mark it with ceremony. She wasn't given to anniversaries unless they involved cake. But she felt the date the way you feel certain dates. A particular weight in the morning. A quality of light that carried memory. She watched the weather report in the afternoon. Another storm. Not the severity of 2 years ago, but cold, the kind of night that emptied streets and kept people behind locked doors. She called the kitchen. Stay open late tonight. Keep all the lights on. She drove over herself at 5, made a double batch of soup, cornbread, stacked extra blankets near the door, coffee on, tables wiped. Everything ready. Regulars came through in the early evening. By 9, the dining room was empty. May stood behind the counter, wiped a bowl that was already clean, listened to the wind against the windows, the same feverish sound. She knew it the way she knows something that has come for you before and found you still standing. At 9:15, a knock. She set the bowl down, walked to the front door, opened it. A young woman, mid-20s, dark hair plastered to her face by snow. Shaking, not polite, shivering, the whole body kind that comes from too long in serious cold, pressed against her chest. A toddler wrapped in a blanket soaked through. The child's face was red, his eyes were wide and bewildered. The woman's eyes found May's and stayed there. "My car broke down on the highway," she said. Barely a voice left. "We walked. I don't know how far. I saw the light." She was crying, not from sadness, from the specific relief of someone who has been terrified a long time and has just found somewhere to stop. May looked at her, looked at the child, did not hesitate, not for 1 second, opened the door wide. "Well," she said, "get in here before you freeze to death." She took the child first. Dry blanket from the stack, chair nearest the heater. The boy was cold and disoriented, and his lower lip was beginning its assessment of whether tears were warranted. May looked at him steadily. "You're okay," she said. "You're warm now. You're okay." He studied face, found what he needed, pulled the blanket tighter. She heated soup, poured coffee. Called the tow service, number memorized, used twice in her own life, kept where she could find it. Then she sat across from the young woman and let her breathe, let her warm up, let her come back from wherever the cold and fear had sent her. The woman's hands steadied around the mug. Her shoulders came down from where they'd been, up near her ears. She looked at May. "Why are you being so kind to me?" May looked at her. Thought of a night, 2 years ago. A hand on a doorknob, 30 seconds. The memory of 40 minutes on cold steps. 5 strangers in a bus, pot of soup and a coat that still smelled like the man who wore it. A street with working lights. 2 children going to college. A kitchen that bore 2 names above its door. All of it leading here, to this table, to this woman, to this moment. "Somebody knocked on my door once, too," she said. Quiet, true all the way through. This is just what we do here. The tow truck came at 11. The part the car needed would be in by morning. The young woman, her name was Caroline. She'd been driving back from her mother's, hadn't expected the storm to come in this fast, accepted the cot in the back office without much argument because she was exhausted and the offer was genuine. And sometimes the right response to kindness is simply to receive it. May locked up at midnight, stood at the front door, looked out through the glass at Harlan Street, new lights on, sidewalk even under them. The playground at the corner, the swings moving slightly in the last of the evening wind. She turned off the hut dining room lights, turned off the kitchen lights, locked the back, came to the front door, and reached inside. Found the switch for the lamp by the door, the small one that showed through the glass from the street. She looked at it, left it on, locked the front door with the light burning behind the glass, walked to her car, drove home down Harlan Street, past the new lights, past the even sidewalk, past the playground, and Vera's house and the Kepner house where the children were asleep. Went inside, stood at the kitchen table, the one that no longer wobbled. On the wall between the window and the back door, the framed magazine cover hung where she had put it herself. Garrett Briley's face looking out at her, because it made her laugh every time she walked past it, and she had decided that things which made you laugh deserved to be kept where you could see them. She looked at Leland's photograph on the mantel. We did okay, baby, she said. Not fine. Not fine anymore. Okay. Which was honest. Which meant something. Which was the word that told the truth instead of just keeping the conversation from going further. She went to bed. And 2 blocks away, in the window of the kitchen that bore 2 names above its door, a lamp burned through the rest of the night. Not because anyone forgot to turn it off. Because someone had decided it should stay on. Just in case. Just in case someone was out there on the cold in the dark, looking for a sign that there was somewhere to go. Someone who would open the door. Somewhere warm. Somewhere that would say, "Here, come in. This is just what we do here." Outside, snow fell quietly on Harlan Street. On the new sidewalks and the new lights and the playground where children would return in the morning. On Leland's porch, which stood exactly where he had built it. On a town that had lost a great deal and was, slowly and without fanfare, learning what it still had. And one light stayed on, like it always had, like it always would.